Now, to set the context, the American Psychological Association every few years conducts a survey, very sophisticated sampling methodology to make sure it's representative of the United States population. And their most recent one was in 2011, and you can actually find it at stressinamerica.org. Now, here's just a few snippets from that, the findings. That more than 20% of us report that our stress on a 10-point scale is often 8, 9, or 10. So pretty darn high. And here's an interesting one. 92% believe that stress negatively impacts health, yet less than a third of us believe that it negatively affects our health. We're all special, right? Nearly half of the respondents say that they're pretty poor at preventing or managing their stress, with the top stressors being work and money, and the top barrier being time. I don't have time to do that. Well, again, throughout today, the emphasis will be on let's make time a non-issue. Let's look at things that people can start to assess, modify in ways that kind of increase the chance of success, and certainly all the evidence supports will help them develop better habits. The 5 top symptoms of stress, 3 of them are emotional, irritability, anxiety, and feeling sad, but the two of the top 5 have to do with low energy and fatigue. Now, in 2011, this most recent survey, because of the growing prevalence of caregivers for family members at home, they oversampled that population. They reported a number of things. Just one of them was that 1 out of every 3 caregivers report that they provide attention and support more than 40 hours a week to these alien family members, when usually that's on top of a part-time, sometimes even a full-time job. Now, when you ask people what really contributes to kind of your quality of life, certainly maintaining family and friend relationships is important, managing stress, and the usual suspects of getting enough sleep, eating well, and exercising. Now again, the things that prevent people from doing things that they know are good for them are not enough time and willpower. But I will tell you, willpower is a very outdated term. When we look at the research in the last 6 or 7 years on self-control, we realize we can actually increase that muscle, self-control muscle. We can do that gradually over time with a couple of specific different ways. And that willpower conveys this sense that it's a trait or a personality characteristic that's kind of immovable. And that's really not the case. So it's not that you're lazy or don't have willpower. We can engineer our own environments, change how we think and respond to stress in ways that willpower really is not even relevant anymore. Now, a third of us report that we're not getting enough sleep, with even more proportion of those caregivers reporting not sufficient sleep. And that, again, a majority of us are stating that we're trying more than ever before to get sufficient sleep, with 44% of us apparently saying that we will not infrequently lay awake at night. Now, when you look at kind of the sociodemographic differences in respondents and what they're telling us, the younger crowd, those under 40, are saying that stress is likely to decrease their sex drive, increase feelings of anxiety and nervousness, as well as fatigue. Now, what's interesting is the people over 60 report the same things, but they don't attribute it to stress. They say it's part of the normal aging process. Okay. Now, when you look at regional differences, those on the East Coast tend to report more stress. Statistically significant difference, I think it's like 7.3. People in the Midwest report 7.2, people on the West Coast 7.1, but that's a significant difference. People on the West Coast report being healthier, and while they report the same level of emotional symptoms in response to stress as the rest of the country, they say that the stress impacts their physical health to a lesser degree. And people on the West Coast say that they actually do socialize more when stress is high, whereas people on the Eastern Seaboard apparently prefer their rum and gin. Now, this is self-report. This is not a food frequency survey, keep in mind. That people on the East Coast report more often having diets that are pretty high in saturated fats and high in sodium, whereas as you move toward closer to the West Coast, they report having diets that are less often high in those substances. And people on the West Coast, and again as you move east it gets worse, tend to report that they're getting sufficient activity or exercise. Now, some other contextual things to keep in mind. While the prevalence of saying that I often feel fatigue is about 6 to 7%, 1 out of every 5 patients who goes to their primary care physician has their primary complaint being low energy and chronic fatigue. The other contextual factor that I want us to kind of consider is developmental and through the lifespan. How might that influence a report and the impact of fatigue? Well, understand that certainly infants, toddlers, and young kids might need a good 10, 11, 12 hours of sleep per day or more. Adolescents generally need about 9, maybe 10 hours of sleep, but their circadian rhythm has shifted a good almost 2 hours compared to those of us who might be in our 30s, 40s, and 50s. So their bodies really are set in a way that they're ready to go to sleep not until about midnight, and therefore not wake up until about 8, 9, even 10 in the morning. Well, if you know any teenagers, what are we expecting them to do? Not to just wake up at 7, but to be at class ready to learn by 7:15, 7:30 sometimes. As we develop, we start to party more. We might cram for exams. Those are certainly contextual factors for fatigue when it's reported by those between 18 and 25. New parents know that that little 7-pound bundle of joy never got the memo to sleep through the night. So, whether it be months or even years, that's certainly going to be one factor we have to take into account when a person says that they're fatigued and low energy. Menopause depends on appreciation by the culture. I will tell you that my reading suggests that the United States isn't even near the top when it comes to understanding and accounting for the change. The impact of hormonal changes on women's energy level, fatigue, cognitive function, mood, emotional stability, and so forth, it really is severely underappreciated or taken into account. And so I think hopefully going forward that will improve. Another loss of aging is sleep. Now what I mean by that is we need less sleep as we age. When you get into your late 60s, 70s, and certainly your 80s, the average person's need for sleep goes down to about 6.5, maybe 7 hours. So when a patient comes to me and they're in their 70s and they say, I just am not sleeping 8 hours anymore, I need your help to do that, I will give them the bad news that that's probably an unrealistic goal. Okay? 8 hours, that proverbial kind of ideal there, maybe for if you're in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, but certainly as we age, we need to be about an hour or 2 less of sleep for every 24-hour cycle. And I also just want us to consider a little more often, maybe fatigue is something, it's a symptom of something larger that's amiss, right? Are we sometimes a little too quick to try and solve this as a problem, when perhaps throughout, especially later today, I'll want you to reflect on maybe this is an opportunity to kind of be still and kind of reflect on what's going on in the larger picture.